Do you picture time more as a line or a circle? Surprisingly, that answer has a really big impact on your relationships, your social life, even your physical health. And there's research that suggests that if you can shift your perspective from one to the other, it can have really profound impacts on you. I've spent a good chunk of the last 10 years living abroad, and one of the things I've come to realize is I'm not just navigating different time zones, but also these different cultural perceptions of time. And the crazy thing is that as I have changed my own perceptions of time, I've started to find that a lot of what the research suggests is showing up in my own life. Reduced stress levels, lower blood pressure, all these things that I never would have really expected. And that's a powerful thing for like an abstract idea to be able to accomplish. I mean, like, how can an abstract concept kind of change your physical world in that way? And more than that, like, why have most people never even heard of this concept before? The only place I've ever really seen this discussed is like corporate cultural awareness training slide decks. And they never really capture like the impact these things can have. It's always just about how to be a better, mid-level manager. And I think part of that is because this idea is actually, it's like a really hard idea to communicate. It's an idea that sort of plays on all of our biases and assumptions and preconceived notions about how the world works. In this video, my challenge is to kind of find a way to communicate this idea and hopefully get you to a point where you can take this abstract concept and get some real tangible benefits from it in your own life. Okay, so first we have to start with a little bit of the boring background, but stick with me because I promise this is actually really interesting and kind of like enlightening. So back in 1959, this anthropologist named Edward Hall first labeled different cultural approaches to time management, and he called it monochronic and polychronic. Monochronic time, it's more linear. It treats time kind of like a queue, one task at a time, fixed slots, being on time sort of signals respect. Efficiency is kind of measured in work completed per unit. We use this kind of to label systems and environments where you're really depending on tight coordination. Polychronic time treats time as flexible. Several things can happen together. Plans flex around people and context, and sometimes finishing something well matters more than starting the next thing on time. It leaves room for caring more about people and relationships and community. We use it for sort of things that are more cyclical, seasons and weather and community rhythms, that sort of thing, and everyday life basically outside of corporate schedules. And the more time I spent abroad, the more I recognized how clocks really weren't measuring time neutrally. They are creating a particular type of time. The mechanical clock, right? It emerges as a way of regulating the timing of prayers at monasteries. And then eventually for regulating labor and education and transportation. And now, like every Google Calendar invite you've ever gotten. And this is the great trick of monochronic time, is it convinces us that it is time itself, when in reality, it's just a structure that we have imposed on top of time. And that means that polychronic time, that gets coded as absence, as lateness, as poor planning, as unprofessional, as somehow like less evolved. It's a perception that's rooted in colonialism's sort of old habit of linking industrial timekeeping with civilization and seasonal cyclical time with backwardness and agriculture. But the thing is that these systems, they fundamentally just optimize for different things. One is not inherently better than the other. As somebody who came from a world really steeped in like efficiency and optimization, to me, it seemed kind of like impossible that polychronic timekeeping could be remotely even valid. Like, I genuinely don't think I ever would have believed it until I moved to Southeast Asia and lived in a polychronic culture and saw that things kept on working and they work just fine. Work gets done, people live their lives. And the process is like a lot less stressful and anxiety inducing. And people seem to have their priorities much better aligned with living meaningful and like fulfilling lives. To me, that was like the first hint that maybe my really, really strict, rigid way of thinking about time, it wasn't necessarily better and actually might have like real tangible consequences. So my obsession with visualizing time kind of started very practically. I needed to coordinate across time zones. I lived abroad a lot and I kept making really silly mistakes where I'd do subtraction errors and forget that it was actually yesterday with the folks I was talking to, and which countries then observed daylight savings and which ones didn't. And it was just kind of a headache. And it's funny to think because before time zones existed, each town kept its own local time based on the sun's position. So in the United States around like 1850, cities, I believe, had over 300 different local times. And that wasn't really a problem when travel was slow and there wasn't instant communications, because effectively nothing was traveling faster than the speed at which the sun was moving. So it made sense to use the time where you were at any given point. But industrialization is what kind of changed all of that. Railroads needed coordination. Telegraphs required these precise timestamps, right? And like scheduling things across time zones mattered, but there weren't any at the time. And the lack of standardization kind of created this chaos in a really quickly industrializing world. So this guy, Sir Sanford Fleming, he's a Canadian, he's a rail engineer, misses a train because of time discrepancies across multiple regions, and he proposes dividing the world into these 24 time zones in the 1870s. So why is that interesting? It's interesting because time zones are a human invention, right? The process of building time zones reflects the same assumptions embedded in like monochronic thinking. So linearity, measurability, control, compartmentalization, scalability. It's like a perfect kind of visual metaphor for how Western culture came in and literally reshaped time itself to match its assumptions and its needs and the requirements it had to grow. So before I flew out to Chiang Mai this last year, I bought this watch thing. It's a world timer. It's got a rotating bezel for all of the 24 time zones in the world. And it doesn't just show a 12-hour time, it has a second time for 24 hours, which I can then rotate to show me the time at any given moment all across the world. So instead of having to go in and try to subtract 14 hours in my head and figure out a yesterday or whatever, I can just rotate it to the current time in my zone and it shows me everything I need. And there's something kind of cool about this because the information is very spatial. It's simultaneous, it's circular. And for like a visualization nerd like myself, this is a really fascinating way to like give structure to a very sort of abstract idea like time. And so I realized I could take this, I could kind of print it out. I could have this nice big kind of time zone tool I could keep on my desk. And as I stared at this thing and started using it, it kind of clicked for me that the world timer doesn't really show time passing. It shows time coexisting at a certain point across all these different regions, right? All the hours live on the dial at once. There's no before or after in absolute terms, just like different positions and a rotation. And in many ways, it's a very polychronic kind of object. And every time I glance at it, I'm sort of reminded that like my very monochronic Google Calendar with its sequential blocks of items one after another is really only like one way of organizing and visualizing that concept, that it can look very, very different. I started sketching both of these frameworks, trying to make them visible, trying to give them some kind of shape. And monochronic time really wants a timeline, a Gantt chart, a cue, a ruler subdivided into units, time as a resource, time as a supply chain. You could optimize it, fill it, waste it. It had shape that's manageable. It fits that industrialist mindset. But polychronic time kind of resisted visualization. I drew overlapping circles, conversations, errands, meals, bleeding into each other. These spirals maybe, the way rituals repeat, but kind of don't really return to exactly the same point. I drew constellations with nodes of meaning connected by relationships or something other than a sequence, and nothing really quite captured it the way I wanted to. And that failure was kind of the point, right? You can't necessarily see polychronic time from the outside. You have to sort of inhabit it. And it's why like cultural awareness training decks don't really work that well, because it's very hard to teach someone how to perceive time differently by just like showing them a slide. They have to feel what it's like when you're in a meeting and it starts 30 minutes late and somehow the lateness is totally fine, expected even, and even generous because people could finish up what they were doing before and finish it properly and everything just kept on working, right? Now, I felt like pretty let down here because I really pride myself on taking like new and novel concepts and finding ways to like visualize them and communicate them. It's sort of my job. And I knew there was some way to do this. I was just really struggling to find it. So for a long time, I just set this idea kind of to the side. In fact, I first started working on this story, I think almost 7 years ago. At the time, I was living in this tiny little condo in Chiang Mai, and I was just beginning the process of moving back to the US after my first extended long-term period abroad. And when I arrived back in the US, the sort of reverse culture shock was really intense. Much more intense than the original culture shock I had coming to Asia. I don't even think at that time I'd really conceptualized that like I was living in a place with such a different perception of time, but Like the intensity, the stress, every person kind of felt like they were right at the breaking point back in the US. Within the first, I don't know, 48 hours back in the US, I saw more people fighting and yelling than I had in the entire time I spent abroad. At that point, I just didn't really know what to make out of it. So look, there's this cardiologist, Robert Levine, and he found that cities with faster paces of life actually had significantly higher rates of coronary heart disease. Chronic time pressure doesn't come without consequences. So I'm in the midst of all this American monochronic intensity, and I have these kind of fresh eyes, right? Because I've been gone for so long. And that's right when a major world event hits that forced every person on our planet to reconcile with their perception of time. And that was the pandemic. Suddenly the kind of monochronic scaffolding collapsed. The commute that separated work from home, or the office space that cordoned off productive time, the daycare schedule that kind of kept your kids sequestered in their own temporal track, it all kind of bled together into one thing. And for a lot of people, this was really catastrophic. And for others, it was really liberating. And the difference wasn't necessarily personality. I think it was more which temporal framework fit your life's actual shape. And then at the tail end of the pandemic, and after a really crazy journey of building and losing this giant social media audience, I have a whole other video about that if you want to hear more about it. It was time for my wife and I to move back to Southeast Asia. And I started thinking again about that old challenge, which was how to visualize this idea of different perceptions of time. And it was pulling out that world timer that kind of solidified it. And I want to show you what I've got, because I think it almost gets there, but I need a second pair of eyes. So the way we perceive time isn't just one way or the other, right? We all, no matter our culture, are going to move between being more monochronic and polychronic throughout our lives, but even just throughout the day, right? At work, things might be more linear and measurable. At home, more flexible. When you're out with your friends, completely different. So despite all of our efforts to kind of force a monochronic model onto an inherently really polychronic world, the ways we visualize time still tend to lean to that sort of cyclical, seasonal pattern. And this is kind of what finally clicked for me. We're taking our predominant model of time, a clock, 12-hour cycles, broken into one task, the next task, the next task, to the next. And we're just being more realistic about how it actually works. We have many simultaneous tasks, simultaneous realities, and we need to kind of move fluidly between them. Life is complex. It is contextual. Things change, things adjust, and realizing that these tracks can and in many times should be freely rotated to preserve your relationship, to give you, I don't know, time to get the job done right, to maintain your sanity. Our brains need that flexibility and they crave it. And as we can start to see that most tasks, most of life doesn't fit this rigid structure, it can kind of turn down the volume a little bit on those, I think, sort of relentless societal voices telling us that we need to hurry, that we need to rush, that we need to get more done in less time and be constantly productive all the time. It's not instantaneous. It's not like you see this and it's all gone. But I think this gives our brain the scaffolding it needs to start to deconstruct a little bit of that monochronic rigidity that has taken over most of our lives. And look, it's not elegant, it's definitely not perfect, but I think it's the beginning of thinking differently about time and shifting towards time that prioritizes maybe the human experience over optimization and output. And the fact that that even sounds like a radical idea is wild to me. What are we doing here if not considering that? So I'm hoping that gives you kind of the flexibility you need to maybe move between these two more fluidly, and to take a breath and lower your heart rate a little bit. And I don't know, if you find yourself thinking differently about this today or next week or sometime in the future, let me know. I want to chat with folks in the comments. I want to get more perspectives on this because I'm no expert. I'm just sort of exploring this. And I really love an idea of an abstract concept being able to tangibly impact someone's life. I want to do more of these. So let me know what you think. Have a good one wherever you are in the world. Bye for now, folks.